Taitsai. Taitsai, page 1046. The portion itself, at some point we're going to perhaps do at times some of the Haftarot. But today we're going to talk about the portion itself, a very detailed portion. You go out to war, and page 1046. So the first section, which we're not going to talk about in detail, deals with the Yafat Torah, the beautiful woman taken captive. This is a portion that addresses the ugliness of war. War is at times glorified, which the older you get, the more it sickens you. Perhaps it's important for an 18, 19-year-old who's going to serve in an army. Perhaps for them it's necessary to view it as something that's glorified. The more you read, perhaps the older you get, you look at it very differently. It's necessary. You have to have an attitude that it's necessary because the evil forces in the world glorify it, and we're stuck with that. The nastiness of battle is presented in this portion because we know very well, not just by studying history, but by reading the news, what was done with women, specifically in war. You don't have to go so far because it's happening probably this moment in Iraq with the followers of the peaceful religion of Islam and the state they are establishing in Iraq and Syria. In Judaism, Judaism addresses human nature, and Judaism says that yes, you take women, but there are guidelines how to do it. And this is a portion that gives us, it's a brief paragraph that gives us the guidelines that, well, you act like an animal, and therefore as a result taking the woman is something that's natural for the warrior. But I'm going to give you some guidelines here. Number one, let her remove those beautiful garments that they would put on her to attract the men, to take away a little bit of that attraction. Don't just treat her as you want, bring her home first. If afterwards you're not interested in her, don't just sell her. So this is not a text that is talking about to the tzaddik, to the righteous people. It's a text that's talking to raw people, to people. And people that act in a way that unfortunately humans do. But Torah is telling you that even when you are in that condition, I will guide you, I will gear you. And as the rabbis tell us, Lo Dibra Torah Ela Keneged Yetzer Hara. The Torah is facing the realities of what humans, and especially men, are about in the battlefield. And therefore it is one that is not telling them it's prohibited because the condition is such that they're going to do what they want, but guide them and lead them in the right direction. That's how you should understand the portion, but it's not the portion I will discuss in detail. But rather, we're going to skip forward to verse 18, the same page, about another magnificent, wonderful, elevating topic, and that has to do with the rebellious son. The rebellious son. So that's what we're going to read. Verse 18. Ki ye leish. It's interesting that the first two portions of this, the first two parshiot, when I use the word parshiot, I mean paragraphs. The first two paragraphs deal with problematic marriages. I think that with all our complaints about the shidduch scene, it is far better finding a wife with a shidduch than in the battlefield and the Yafas Torah. I think we agree with that. And then the next portion talks about a person who has two wives, and one of them he doesn't like so much. Another magnificent romantic text presented in the Torah. And lo and behold, what's the third portion going to be talking about? A rebellious son. Like, ahem, what do you expect exactly? If that's how you view marriage and that's how you view the wife, don't expect your son to be too much better. That's the message here. Ki yeh leish. Verse 18. Ben sorer umoreh. So they translate that as a person that's wayward and rebellious. If you analyze the Hebrew itself, the word sorer comes from a person that is sar, removes himself from the traditional, from the normal path. Sar. And in addition, he is moreh. So moreh relates to the word of mored, or someone that just has a bitter attitude and he's rebellious. But some note that there are times in life when I remove myself from the path. I am not acting appropriately. I'm a human. I have good days. I have bad days. So when I have those bad days, when I'm in a bad mood, I'm not in a mood of doing what I should be doing, what's important is to at least remember that it's a bad day. When I have a bad day, and I have a negative attitude, and I see the whole world as they're out to get me, and then I decide that, you know what, I'm going to make that into my philosophy. In other words, I'm going to take that negative existence and start developing a system of belief that that is actually the right approach. That to be cynical and view everyone as negative and ignore the commandments of the Almighty, that is actually what I should be doing, that it becomes extremely problematic. Because as long as I am sar, as long as I am removed from the path, but know that I should be fixing myself, I'm in good condition. You know, the person who does everything wrong one day, right? You know, didn't do well with God and didn't do well with humans, and goes to sleep depressed at the end of the day, knowing that God is not satisfied with them, the spouse is not, the children are not, the parents are not, the mother is not. So they wake up the next morning. And they wake up the next morning and they know very well that it was a bad day. And then they go ahead and they start their blessings, their tefillot, with Birkot HaTorah, the blessing of the Torah. And I go up and I declare, Asher bach harbanu mikol amim. God, me, I'm chosen from among all the nations. Me who yesterday, right, was disgusting to the neighbor, disgusting to the spouse, disgusting to the children, didn't make one of the blessings with any kavanah. Me, I am chosen from among all the nations. What should I be thinking then? I'm chosen. So what you should be thinking is, I am chosen because I have a text, I have a Torah that gives me the opportunity to fix myself. In other words, Torah does not mean you are perfect. Having received the Torah and having a Torah education does not mean that you are perfect. It means that I recognize on a daily basis that I have a God that accepts me as I am. He actually made me as a human. But He has handed me a book, a tradition. He has given me guidance as to how to return to the proper path. That's what I should be saying. And that's what Judaism is about. It's the ability to fix yourself. Don't accept yourself for yesterday. Don't go ahead and create some kind of philosophy that defends or makes your rotten condition as an ideal, but rather recognize the ideal and realize that you have the tools to improve. That's what Judaism is about. So the greatest danger is to be a sar, to be a person who removes himself from a path, a traditional path that decent human beings follow, and then go ahead and start being what the rabbis call moreh heter. He guides himself with a leniency. In other words, I'll start eating treif after being educated that is I shouldn't be eating it, but then I'll develop a philosophy that in this day and age it's not really necessary to follow the laws of kosher. I could do that, right? I could come up with all kind of magnificent explanations. To be a sar and a moreh, to be a sar, to remove myself from the path, and then started giving it a philosophical backing to go ahead and give myself the confidence that I could continue on the path and therefore shut down that guilt, the necessary guilt, because it's the guilt that will help me get back on the right path, then I have a problem. Ben sorer umoreh. So we're taking an approach that the moreh is from the word hora'ah, from a teaching. I give myself a teaching to defend my corrupt sar. So what's with this child? Eineno shomea bekol aviv ubekol imo. He does not tune in to the voice of the father or the mother. Not that he's wearing headphones the whole time, right? And doesn't hear anything because he's connected to his iPad that he got for his bar mitzvah. No, that's not the case. But rather he just ignores them, period. Ve'yisru oto, and even when they discipline him, lo yishma alehem, he will not listen. Now, the Torah itself gives us no idea what that means. Does that mean that he was told to clean his room 25 times and he ignored them, right? Does that mean that he was told to shut off the Xbox or the gaming system? No, the Torah does not tell us. But the rabbis derive from a verse that relates zolel and sovet to wine and meat. So it is a child who OD'd on meat and wine. But there are guidelines there. It doesn't mean a child just drank too much after the Seder or ate too much meat at a Jewish affair, but rather specifically he stole it from others when he shouldn't have. He takes the meat, he takes the wine. This is the rebellious child according to rabbinic tradition, which of course needs clarification. So what do the parents do? So again, another awkward portion. V'tafsu bo aviv ve'imo. The parents go ahead and grasp him, and they take him el ziknei iro, and they take him to the elders, ve'el shar mekomo, and to the gates of the city, the gates where the elders sit, the beddin, and they share with him. Not the norm. The norm is that when this happens, the Jewish parent starts saying that it's the school that's the blame, right? That, they're just the teachers who do a better job. They're not educating. They put too much homework on him or not enough homework on him. The hours are too short in school. If they would just be a little bit longer, he would learn more. Other parents believe that the hours are too long. That's the traditional Jewish approach. But here we're talking about an abnormal situation. By just reading it, this is awkward. And if you find verse 20, them saying to the elders, "B'neinu zeh sorer u'moreh eneno shameh bekolenu zolel v'soveh." He's a person that's gluten, he's a drunk. So what do? Right? A very Jewish approach to the problem. Uregamu kol anshe iro ba'avanim v'met. The whole community should gather and pelt him with stones, and he shall die. Ubi'arta hara mikibecha. You should remove the evil from your midst, and all of Israel, Chol Yisrael Yishmu ve'irau. So if we would just base our tradition on reading Torah and creating a religion based on it, we would be a very destructive, harmful, primitive religion. And that's what the text on the surface tells us, but we know very well that there's an oral tradition. And the oral tradition places limitations on it. And in essence, I'll share with you a statement from the Talmud. The Talmud in Sanhedrin is discussing the Ben Sorer Umoreh. And the Talmud tells us that you should know, number one, a child can be a Ben Sorer Umoreh only from age 13 to age 13 and 3 months. So they're limiting it because it can't be a child. Child is not yet mature enough to be punished. It can't be a complete adult because he's not going to be defined as a ben. So therefore it has to be right after the bar mitzvah, when he's spoiled from the gifts. Right after the bar mitzvah for a period of 3 months. Then the Talmud adds that you should know, it has to be that he was ganav mishel aviv. It has to be that the food that he stole belongs to his parents. And then the Talmud continues with all kind of other limitations, and then we have the winner here. So listen carefully. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. So Rabbi Yehuda tells us, Im lo hayta imo shaveh le'aviv. If the mother was not equal to the father, bekol, with voice, mareh, physical appearance, ubekoma, and height, eino naaseh ben sorer umoreh. He cannot become a rebellious child until the parents have the same voice, the same physical appearance, and the same height. Where does Rabbi Yehuda get it? Because the Torah tells us, Eino shomea bekolenu. He is not listening to our voice in unison. The Torah takes the voices of the parents, uses one word to describe their voice. The voices have to be equal. So therefore Rabbi Yehuda tells us that what the Torah is really telling us is that they have to be similar with mareh and koma, with appearance and height as well. So the Talmud...
Why koma?
Height. They have to be very, very similar. What's the idea behind it? We'll try to get to it. But then the Talmud tells us that you should know that based on that, Ben Sorer Umoreh, a rebellious child, stoned to death by the community, Due to the request of the parents, the Talmud tells us, lo haya, it never occurred, velo atid lehiyot, it's never going to happen. So this portion that agitated us, never occurred, will never happen. So then we ask the obvious question, velama nichtav, so why is it recorded at all? This makes no sense. So the Talmud tells us, derosh, go ahead and darshan it, learn it, study it, give a drosh on it. And by doing it, we're going to learn some important messages about Judaism, about Jewish education, about children. And as a result, kabel sachar, and you will be rewarded. Okay? That's what the Talmud tells us. Another opinion, but that's what's presented as the given opinion. It never occurred because it's impossible. No two parents are going to have the exact same voice. No two parents are going to look alike. No two parents are always going to be the exact same height. So with the other requirements of how much meat and how much wine and where he drinks it and when he drinks it, it never ever occurs. So what are we doing here with this portion? Okay, so the commentators have had the opportunity for drushes over the years. But the main idea, what we are being told here, is as follows. We often have a tendency of labeling people as difficult people, or at times bad people. When you do that with teenagers, you have to realize that that's a big mistake. Teenagers, the Torah is telling us, their behavior is due to conditions that are external. And if you go ahead and analyze this young man or young woman and get to the core, you realize that there's a good core. It has to be guided. You have to go ahead and educate the young individual. But recognize that there are foreign aspects that are having an impact, that are creating the problems. The problems are external. The problem could be that, for example, a teenager realizes that the parents don't really get along, right? That the father has one attitude towards Judaism, the other has a different one. So what are they going to do? They're going to go ahead and place themselves in the middle and position father against mother. They're going to pick it up very, very fast. And they're going to go ahead and utilize the lack of unity, the fact that the parents don't sound like one another, that they don't appear like one another, right? That they don't have the same height and their growth is on different levels. The child is going to create problems because he feels uncomfortable at home. The home is not a safe place. And if the home is not a safe place, and he could go ahead and position himself between the parents who view things differently, bingo, he's going to create problems. So therefore, what we, or our drasha, this is one of the drashas that's presented by the many thinkers, that you should know the problems that are there are not because he is corrupt to the core. Don't try to break him. I've heard this, that there are educators, quote unquote, who believe that there are specific young men that you have to break them. Right? Why? Because they find an element of corruption in the personality. Now, Judaism, or what the Torah is telling us here, is that to go ahead and find someone that you stone, right, it's not the norm. It is not something that ever occurs. Analyze what's happening around the person, and analyze the environment he or she is in, and then you will go ahead and realize what the real problem is and address it. Don't go ahead and label the person, because if you label the person, you can forget about improving. If you work in understanding the environment, what the person is going through, then you could go ahead and actually develop things. So this is an idea. Derosh, don't view this Judaism. And again, at times, for example, there's the discussion in the United States, perhaps in Canada as well, the death penalty. Do you believe in the death penalty? Or do you not believe in the death penalty? Right? So what would be a Jewish answer towards it? The Jewish answer would be that, believe it or not, there's a benefit of having the death penalty in the books. Because by having the death penalty for very severe crimes, like killing another person, you are indicating and you are teaching society that there are some crimes that you are no longer worth living if you have committed them. Now, to actually go ahead and implement it, to actually go ahead and put someone in the electric chair, we're not so proud of Texas that believes that it's considered an accomplishment every single time you kill and execute someone, and they're very, very proud. And if you want to ever run for a governor in Texas, you have to be sure that you're not just, pro the electric chair, but one that is proud in it, and wear a T-shirt stating, I believe in executions. That's not the Jewish approach. The Jewish approach is have it on the books, but try to avoid it. We know very well, specifically regarding the death penalty, when the Talmud tells us that Rabbi Akiva was of the opinion that if you have a court, and the court was not able to save someone, even if it's once in 7 or even 70 years, it's considered a problematic court, meaning the court has the responsibility that even if there is someone that on the surface does deserve to be executed, the court has a responsibility of doing the best it can, to try to go ahead and create some kind of question regarding the witnesses or the circumstances. Avoid it to take a human life, but it should. So if so, you ask, if we are told it should be avoided, why is it in the books at all? To teach you a message, and that's what's happening here. The Torah is telling you that if you have a young man that is not sensitive to the property of others, that life is all about enjoying himself, and he is willing to harm others on the path of his own personal enjoyment. Correct? You see young. I have a thing against BMWs. I hope no one drives your BMW. But I have something that I sense that if you look at Finch or Bathurst and you see a car zooming, going way above the speed limit, from a distance I'll say it's most probably a BMW. Now someone didn't, am I in trouble with anyone? I don't know where it comes from, but I spot a few of them. What happens is that you at times have people that view a vehicle as a toy that you could have a lot of fun with, and you could speed race. Just recently in the news, you had 2 people having a race down a road, and of course they killed someone on the way. Where does that come from? Well, that comes from a person that has an agenda in life, to enjoy himself. And his agenda to enjoy himself is more significant to him than anyone else around him. That is a dangerous being. That is a person that is not worth living, because he could be very destructive and harmful to society. That's the message that we are learning here. If the young man at that age, at that crucial age when he's developing, is willing to go ahead and steal from others to fulfill his desires, it is someone that's not worth living. Not that the Torah wants you to execute such a person, but the Torah wants you to be aware of the danger of that era. This is what the learning is about. Now there's one other insight that Rab Meir Simcha of Devinsk shares with us. The Talmud is at times quite poetic. And the Talmud tells us, this is a Talmud that is talking about the temple, the Bet HaMikdash, and the Kohanim. There were some Kohanim that rabbinic tradition was very proud of. There are other Kohanim that the rabbis were very critical of. And they recorded names, places, and behaviors. So the Talmud tells us that at one point, poetically, Tzavcha ha'azara, that the courtyard of the temple itself, where the Kohanim would eat specific cuts of meat that were brought as gifts. So the Azara itself cried out. It's like saying Sion cries out for the fact that we did not return. A shul cries out that I can't hear myself talking because there are other people talking. In other words, there are times that structures cry out. So the Azara cried out, Se'u she'arim rashechem. Lift, O gates, lift your rosh. And we say that often, but we have to have the proper image of it. If you have a room, and there is someone that's bigger than the entrance coming in, so what do? How do you let him in if he is bigger than the height of the entrance? You have to, Se'u she'arim, you have to elevate the top beam of the door. Se'u she'arim rashechem, and as a result of the fact that you expand the door, the big guy, the tall guy, could walk in. So when the Talmud wants to note that there is someone that is bigger than life, so what is the Talmud? These are words that David HaMelech already said. Seu sharim hashechem, right? Supitche olam, ve'avo melech hakavod. God is coming in, so you have to open the gates. You have to break the top section of the entrance. So there are times there are people that are so great that it is as if the sharim have to open their gate. V'ikanes, okay, and a person should enter. And who is this person that is great in this case? His name was Yochanan ben Narbai. Yochanan, remember his name, okay? Yochanan, the son of Narbai. And what should he do? What should this great person do? So the Talmud tells us, V'imale kriso, he should fill his stomach, mikotchei shamayim, from the holy meats that are designated for the Kohanim to eat. Okay, he's a great man because he ate well. He made his Yiddish mama proud. He ate very, very well. Amru alav, they said regarding Yochanan ben Narbai, that he would eat the following. Now remember, the temple itself, we always meditate, think about the temple as a very spiritual place. It was. But you have to remember that there was a lot of slaughtering that occurred there. A lot of animals brought as korbanot, a lot of birds that are slaughtered, meal offerings, a lot of food. And if you were a Kohen, yes, the Kohen had to perform a service. But after the service, he would sit down and have a nice, very, very nice fleishik meal. The Kohanim at times were overwhelmed by the amount of korbanot that were brought, and they weren't able to finish what was brought in. So what would be the status of leftover meat? So there's a term for it. What's the term? Notar. Notar, leftover. And when there are leftovers, so the Torah tells us, listen, there's a mitzvah to eat the meat. If you are not able to complete it, we know about it regarding the Korban Pesach, but it applies to any Korban, to any meat or meal offering. If there's leftover and you weren't able to consume it, so then by next morning in some cases you have to burn it. Some korbanot you have an extra day. But it's not considered an ideal. So there was a specific Kohen, our dear friend, Yochanan ben Narbai. And Yochanan had a gesunte appetite. So when he would, maybe they have to lift the side doors when he would come in. So Amru alav, they said about Yochanan, the son of Narbai, Shehaya ochel, that he used to eat, Gimel meot agalim, 300 young calves. Veshoteh, and he would drink, Gimel meot garbeyain, 300 pitchers of wine.
I hope in a year.
Ve'ochel 40 se'ah gozalot, and he would eat the measurement of 40 se'ah. 40 se'ah is the measurement of a mikvah. So imagine a mikvah that is full of it's full of chickens. And that was for his dessert. As a result, Amru alav, they said regarding Yochanan ben Narbai, that throughout his life, there was never any nosar. That's a statement that's made. Now, there's a level of exaggeration here. There's actually a rule you should keep in mind, that whenever the Talmud uses the number 300, it's an exaggeration. It's like one of those secret codes, that when the number 300 appears, you're dealing with an exaggeration. Chassam Sofer, the great thinker of the early 19th century, was just not comfortable of this description of this big rabbi who could eat a lot. So he came up with a creative explanation. What's his creative explanation? That Yochanan ben Narbai was a great man, and he supported a lot of Torah scholars, Kohanim. So when he would come and serve in the temple, he had an entourage with him. So it wasn't him who was eating, it was the entourage. Creativity, a nice approach indeed. But the message is that there was a rabbi. He ate a lot, a Kohen. He ate a lot. It was for the sake of heaven, and he gets credit for it. Fine, this is a well-known, Yochanan ben Narbai is legendary. Right? It's a title that's given to people that do a good job when they eat. As a child, there was a joke that they would say in Israel that if a person has a keres, a stomach, v'zakan, and a beard, chatzi rabbanan, he's already halfway to being a rabbi. That was the line that one of my teachers taught us. That's what the requirements are to be considered a rabbi. So he was a Kohen. Comes, okay, we have it so far. Come Rameir Simcha of Dvinsk, and he shares with us the following. And again, this is about the Ben Sorer Umoreh. We want to go ahead and learn messages from it. We don't want to go ahead and read it to make it part of our practical Judaism. We want to learn about the significance of education and the significance of understanding the challenges the young teenager is going through, but recognize very well that it is quite often, if not always, something external that is causing the problems. So Rameir Simcha quotes a Talmudic saying by a rabbi called Rabbi Natan. Rabbi Natan tells us that you should know, Ben Sorer Umoreh could occur, at least in theory, in other cities. In Yerushalayim, it could never happen. In Yerushalayim, it can never happen. Okay? So the traditional approach to this statement was that, listen, Yerushalayim is a very spiritual city. You are protected from, spiritually you are protected from behavior that is destructive. Therefore, it's not going to occur in Yerushalayim. Fine. That's the traditional approach. Rameir Simcha Dvinsk gives us the following explanations. He notes, just as in the Bet HaMikdash, there were people like Rabbi Yochanan ben Narbai, this Kohen Yochanan ben Narbai, who would eat a tremendous amount as part of their ritual behavior. The same can be said about Yerushalayim. You know that in Yerushalayim there are, for example, you have a field anywhere in Israel. You have to tithe a portion, which is called Ma'aser Shani. 10% of what you tithe, of what is produced in the field, you have to separate it. After you separate it, technically speaking, you're supposed to take that produce and make your way to Yerushalayim and eat it there. The idea behind it is that you spend time in Yerushalayim, you study, you observe righteous people, and it is an opportunity for education. Now, if you think about it, it is extremely difficult for a farmer who is producing corn or grain to schlep 10% of his produce to Yerushalayim. So the Torah itself tells us that what you could do is transfer the sanctity that the produce has on funds, take the funds to Jerusalem, to Yerushalayim, and spend it there on food. Fine. So in Yerushalayim, there was a lot of overeating from Maaser Shani, from the fact that there were specific sacrifices, like the Korban Todah that was eaten in Yerushalayim. So therefore, he notes, Yerushalayim had the same nature as the temple, that there was a lot of spiritual eating. And therefore, he notes, you cannot go ahead and take a young man in Yerushalayim at age 13 and grab him and say, why were you overeating the meat and the wine that belonged to your father? You can't say that to him, and there cannot be a Ben Sorer Umoreh in Yerushalayim, because it is the culture of this city to overeat. The culture of Yerushalayim is that you are always eating. If you've been in Yerushalayim, right? It still is. That is the culture. That you are always eating in Yerushalayim. There's always good restaurants and always the latest. You are eating and eating and eating. Luckily, hopefully you don't have a car in Yerushalayim and you walk it off, hopefully. But you're going to go ahead and get... So therefore, if the culture surrounding the young man is one of consuming food, you cannot blame him. You cannot label him a Ben Sorer Umoreh in Yerushalayim. That's the insight that he gives. And this, of course, tells us as well, when we're dealing with youth, that there's a lot of their behavior that would seem problematic to us, but you have to analyze the society. Who are they hanging out with, right? In Toronto itself, there are many, Baruch Hashem, wealthy people. So there are children that don't come from the wealthiest homes, but they have a desire to have young teenagers or young female teenagers to get the latest shoes every 2 months. There's some kind of Yetzer Hara that I don't fully understand that's called shoes, right? So you want to have the latest shoes every 2 months. So a parent might say, where on earth does this come from? At home, right? Shoes you get, once a year, and then that's it. What's this idea of where does it come from? Something's wrong with the child. So the Torah is telling us, no, nothing is wrong with the child. Analyze the environment that the child is living in. And just as in Yerushalayim, you cannot blame the child for overeating, You cannot, because that's what the culture is about. It's religious eating. Now it's a problem. In other words, that we view the food as holy. There's something wrong with you if on Shabbos you did not have gefilte fish, soup, a big serving of chicken, and a dessert. And if you can't consume all that, you feel that you are lacking in spirituality. That's part of the culture, right? I recently stopped eating cholent, right? And I'm afraid to say it and put it on the web because people will question my commitment to Judaism, right? Like, what kind of Jew doesn't eat cholent? But what's, what? You also, but you don't tell anyone. But that's something that food becomes the identity of religion. And that's what he's identifying in Yerushalayim. It becomes part of the culture. So therefore, if someone is the young man in that environment has a desire to eat more than he could, you can't blame him. Everything is about education. So that's a few of the teachings that relate specifically to the Ben Sorero Moreh. Maybe it's perhaps an important lesson to dealing in general with people, of always recognizing that don't assess them, assess their past.
People try to change their buying habits every 2 months of shoes, or do you say, well, that's what everyone's doing, it's okay?
There's always a proper balance. They say that Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, when he was, he was in Toronto, you know very well. Sure. So when they didn't grow up with too much, when his children would ask for things, from a bike, things that children expect today, he would never say to them, we can't afford it. He would always say to them, you don't need it. You don't need it. Why? You go tell a child you can't afford it, so the child's agenda and goal in life is to afford it. If you train the child, there are things that you don't really need. You don't really need it. So then the child will grow up hopefully knowing that you can live without it. And we all know very well that what makes us happy is not things. There's a fix you get. I don't know how long it lasts when you buy yourself a new pair of socks, or when you buy yourself what else can you buy? Shoes. Okay. It does last. But if you assess, if you would go ahead, buy yourself those shoes, and measure your level of happiness, make a chart, and see, in other words, and then recognize that after 2 hours, it's gone, correct? So, so if you could afford it, there's nothing wrong to feel good about it. But when it takes over your life, and poverty does it, it's interesting that I have an uncle in Israel. I have an uncle, very special man, his name Rabbi Shlomo Sofer. Married to my father's older sister, Aliza. So he had a brother, I think it's a young brother, David Sofer. You know David. So David Sofer grew up in Yerushalayim in the 40s and 50s. And his father was a scholar. So imagine that, a scholar at that time. They had nothing. And no one had anything. No one had anything. And David Sofer, as he went through the yeshiva system, but then he entered business, and he became extremely wealthy. Remember the old Hilton in Jerusalem? Today it was downgraded. What is it? It's a Crown Royal or something? Not Crown Royal. Crown Park, Crown Plaza.
Crown Plaza.
Ben Sauer Amore here. Freudian. So he owned the Hilton when it was still the Hilton. He became extremely wealthy. So it was always interesting. You have a person who grew up with tremendous poverty, and there were rations of food at Senna in the early 50s, and grows up living in London, if you go to the Israel Museum, and you see some of the coins there, we were there, so see some of the coins. So they have a collection of gold, Caesar coins that are 2,000 years old that cost who knows how much, from the personal collection of David Sofer in London. How does that happen? You wonder that. So I met someone who went to school with him in yeshiva, and he told me that when David Sofer was 12, he made a Kabbalah. He accepted it upon himself to become wealthy. That was his goal in life. He has to be wealthy. So therefore, he says that already in school, right, already in 12th grade, if let's say, people would buy a little siddur, so he found a place in town where he could get it a touch cheaper, and he would bring it to the yeshiva and sell it. He was howling from age 12 because he had one goal in life, to be wealthy. And he succeeded, right? Does it bring happiness or not? We could enter into a whole discussion. But the idea is that when you go ahead and have the child, and the child, you say, okay, you know, you could go ahead and do it because everyone else around you does it, you're not really helping the child. You're not helping the child. To go ahead, on the other hand, say you can't have it because we don't, you're harming the child as well. The perfect balance is what we are all searching for. That on the one hand, you don't want to deprive the child. You want them to socially feel connected. You know, you wish that you could guide the child away from a specific group of friends and say, why don't you be friends with those who have a little bit less, and then I can keep more of my paycheck. Why don't you do that? But the realities are such that children are going to choose their path, and you try to find and you pray that the balance that you have chosen, what you do give them and what you don't give them, is the right one. But most of you here could look back and smile and wish your kids luck, and some of us are in the middle of this fascinating Thank you so much. We'll see you next week. Have a good day.